Welcome to our last session of the PENC Virtual Raleigh Seminar. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope that you've enjoyed the sessions that we've had over the past couple of days. After today's session at 5 p.m., we will have a virtual libation conversation happy hour, a time to socialize. Everyone can have their webcams on. We might play a little trivia game. So I hope that you will join us. I put the link to join that in the chat box. As always, if you have technical difficulties, please use the chat box and I will try to assist you. We will take questions throughout the presentation today. You can type those into the questions box and I will ask those out loud to our speaker. Today's speaker is Rich St. Dennis. Rich is an independent trainer and consultant specializing in leadership, emotional intelligence, and business communication. For 10 years, he has conducted the PENC Leadership Institute for Engineers with over 100 participants. This year's class has been conducted virtually through weekly Zoom meetings, email, and phone calls. Rich, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Katie. Thanks for inviting me. Hi, everybody. How are we doing? Wednesday afternoon and libation conversation after this. Sounds great. Okay, we're going to be talking for an hour. We'll open it up to questions towards the end, covering a topic that's so important nowadays, leading in a virtual setting. That's our life these days, isn't it? We're going to be covering several things. First of all, I'll be talking about some of the fundamentals of leadership. What is leading versus what is managing? This is a leadership webinar. We'll talk about what does it mean to lead in a virtual setting? What are some of the challenges? And also, what are some of the best practices for doing this? If you're like me, for about the last 10 months, this has been your livelihood. So we'll talk about leadership, differentiate it from managing, and talk about how to do this well. What comes to mind when you hear the word leading and the word managing? Many times when I do a workshop, they'll recite this very famous quote. We lead people and we manage things. Leadership is a contact sport involving people, whereas managing is about resources. It's about things. Now, if you consider humans to be a resource, to be a thing, I guess you can manage people. But there's an emotional dimension to people that we have to take into account. Now, if you've heard this quote, do you know who came up with this quotation? It was actually a computer scientist many decades ago. Her name was Grace Hopper. She was a PhD mathematician, but she was also a pioneering computer scientist. She happened to be an officer in the Navy, was kept on active duty long after the mandatory retirement age, and she would often give lectures, not just on computer science, but also on leadership skills. So Grace Hopper, thank you for that pretty succinct quote. What are some other words associated with leadership? I want to challenge you right now. Maybe you can get onto your computer and chat. What are some words associated with the act of leading? And what are words uniquely associated with the act of managing? Take 30 seconds, or jot them down, or chat them to me. Love to hear from you.
Rich, I'm not sure if you can see these, but we've got vision, mentoring, encourage, lead by example, inspire, leading, inspiring, influencing, opportunity, leading honesty.
These are awesome answers. I endorse all of them. Now, the trick is to how do you put these into a concise, memorable definition? Well, there are three words that jump out to me. And here's a word cloud with many of the words associated with leadership. When I think of leading, here are the three words that come to mind for me. First of all, visioning. Leaders have vision. They see three things: the past, the present, and also the future. They especially see the way things have been, what's gone well, what hasn't, the way things are going right now, but also how things could yet be at some point in the future. Visioning is actually an act of imagination when you think about the future. The second word is influence. That is a one-word definition for leadership. Leaders are people who influence others to get involved, to embrace an idea, to do something. The third word, inspiring, motivating, engaging, getting people fired up to want to do their very best. So here's a interesting definition that I came across probably a few years ago. Leadership is a process, first of all. It's a set of behaviors over time, and it's a process of arousing and aligning the emotions and energies of people. Arousing and aligning the emotions and the energies of people towards a result desired by the leader. So it's got that word vision embedded in it. Also the business of influencing and inspiring. When you inspire people, you arouse emotions. When you influence people, you align them to your way of thinking or your desired behaviors. Now, here's a word cloud associated with the word managing or management. And here are a few of the words that jump out to mind when I think of managing. I think of managers as being people who do a lot of careful planning, very deliberate planning, and designing processes, systems, ways of doing things, methodologies to produce some kind of output. Also, the manager in us is involved in coordinating, integrating all these resources. And in this day and age, that can be very complex. Managing is a process of wrapping your mind around and making some sense of complexity, planning and coordinating complexity. But also it's observing it and making necessary adjustments. So here's a dictionary definition. It's a process. And here's a very common term associated with managing: directing, but also controlling things in order to achieve a desired results. Now notice leading and managing are both results oriented. They just approach it from different angles. They are different but complementary skills. They're different ways of producing results, and we're all in for that, aren't we? Now, here's an interesting way of looking at it, and I attribute this distinction to John Kotter, famous professor at Harvard. Kotter says that managing produces stability and leading produces change. You create stable, efficient processes and systems, and then the leading is about aligning and energizing people to want to make those systems work. A friend of mine here in Atlanta, Jay Markovitz, and I were having lunch one day. I asked him, Jay, what to your mind is the difference between leading and managing? He paused a second. He says, the manager in us creates systems. The leader in us brings them to life through other people. I thought that was a brilliant definition. That was about 20 years ago, that conversation. It sticks with me to this day. Now, here's one thing I know for sure. You need both, because together, managing and leading can produce results. And by leading well and energizing people, you can make those results sustainable and continuously improving. I love this quote from President John Quincy Adams. Notice the emphasis on the word more. Leaders are people who make things better. Look at this definition. Leadership is the ability to lift people into their better selves. This was James McGregor Burns talking about leadership at a very strategic and high level, lifting people up into their better selves. And here we have to acknowledge that leadership has an ethical dimension to it. Of course, there are certain historical figures who have misled us, for example, led us in the wrong direction. Leadership is about not being great, but getting people to be great. And those are the words of President Ronald Reagan. I remember him being interviewed on PBS. He was at his ranch in California. He was asked a question, Mr. President, what is leadership all about? He said, leadership is not about being great yourself. It's about getting other people to be great. That's your legacy as a leader. When you're gone, what have you left behind? Are people more capable, more motivated, more successful? Now, as I mentioned, both of these are necessary, but in different degrees and in different situations. Sometimes you need a lot of managing when things are really chaotic. Get things organized, get things stabilized. But when things are good, for example, leadership is what will take it up to the next level. And as I mentioned, each is a set of behaviors. And when you have behaviors, you can study them, analyze them, you can learn them, and then you can apply them. So I like the idea that leadership and management are skills, not that you're born with them. Leaders and managers are not made, they are self-made through your will and effort and some learning and practice and some feedback. You can make yourself an exceptional leader. Now, my undergraduate degree is in engineering, and like you, I'm fascinated with processes. So I like to think of things as a process. Here are the steps in the management process. First of all, you see something to be accomplished, something to be attained, something to be delivered. And then you go into some detailed planning on how you're going to make this happen. You then gather and coordinate, organize and coordinate all the resources necessary to have a go at it. And then you implement the plan. But while it's going on, you're monitoring progress and also adjusting and stabilizing those processes. Now, all of this calls for what we call IQ, analytical intelligence. Leadership, though, is a little bit different. It requires what we call emotional intelligence because you're dealing not with things, you're dealing with people, and we are emotional creatures. The first order of business in leading, to my way of thinking, it's all about the relationship. It's not just to build, it's not just to develop, it's to nurture trusting relationships. And that's particularly difficult when you're in a virtual setting. We'll talk more about how to do that. Also, leadership is about having a clear, desired result that you're aiming for, a vision, and setting a clear direction to get there. Here's where influence and leadership become synonymous. Leadership is always about getting people on board willingly, not obligating them to do it, but inviting them and persuading them through your emotional intelligence to join with you to get it accomplished. And then, of course, leadership is about motivating, inspiring, engaging people to do their very best, to want to do their very, very best. Of course, coaching them up to be successful and getting them to work as a unified team. These two words are very closely aligned, to coach and to unify people. And as I mentioned, doing this in an emotionally intelligent way. Let's do a poll. Where are your strengths? Do you see yourself stronger as managing or stronger with your leadership skills? Or are you about the same level with both?
Give everyone about 10 more seconds to get your responses in.
Katie, you ready to publish the survey?
Yes, can you see those results, Rich?
I can't see them myself.
Okay, stronger at managing, 24%, stronger at leading, 35%, about the same at both, 41%.
Very good, very good. I can remember many years ago, I was in Columbus, Georgia at the Pratt & Whitney plant. There was a young supervisor who had leadership coming out of his pores. He was an awesome person in terms of emotional intelligence, connecting with people, getting people unified, but he was a disorganized mess. And I was hired to coach him to improve his management skills. Well, here's one thing I also told him. You don't have to be great in both dimensions, but you have to know where your strengths are. And then maybe call on people to help you with those things that may not be your strong suit. So if you're great at managing, but leading needs some development, maybe there's somebody on the team that can help you, or vice versa. Now, I mentioned the term emotional intelligence. This boils down to emotional skills. And because people are emotional, we just happen to think we're rational. We are emotionally carbon-based living units. And understanding ourselves, our emotions, our actions, our behavior, our effect on other people is very important. You have to know how you're coming across. Of course, in a virtual setting, I have no clue what you're doing right now. Are you listening? Are you on your cell phone, checking your email? I have no idea of my impact on you. Understanding others is especially difficult in virtual settings. Now you have to imagine the person out there. You have to push your emotions through the lens, through the screen, through the technology to show your empathy and your concern for them. Very important as a leader. Of course, particularly in tough times like this, the pandemic, times of a lot of turbulence, uncertainty, risk, stress, it's very important for a leader to control her or his own emotions, but also to help others manage their emotions. We could do 4 hours easily just on this one topic. But also, leadership is about bringing out, arousing healthy emotions, healthy, emotionally mature relationships, healthy behavioral patterns in ourselves, but also in other people. EI, emotional intelligence, you could say that's synonymous with leadership because it's all about people and arousing and aligning their attention, their energies, their emotions, their focus. In a virtual setting, this is hard to do, but extra necessary. So we have to be very attentive to this if we aspire to lead in a virtual setting. So let's go a little bit deeper. What do we mean by leading in a virtual setting? Here is the traditional setting for leadership in person. And what you see here are 6 pictures of people I know very well. I've had the pleasure of working with them over the past 10 years. These are graduates from our Leadership Institute. You may recognize some of the names. In fact, you may be in the picture. I know that from the roster, Some of you from previous classes had signed up for this program. So welcome to Susan and Kenneth and Sonia and all the rest of you. Leadership is often seen as face-to-face, but how do we do this when we're looking at people through a lens or through email, text, phone, and then of course virtually in this wonderful technology that we've been given. So virtual leadership is leading a group of people. Again, it still boils down to visioning, influencing, and inspiring. But then now they're spread out. They're in different locations. They may be in different time zones. They may be on different continents and connected. But how? Not in person, but through communication technology. And this is where things really get interesting. Now, think for a moment. Who was the first great leader recognized across this country, actually even known around the world very well, who was the very first to use technology to lead people who were widely dispersed? Any ideas? Well, it's one of my favorite leaders of all time, Abraham Lincoln. And the technology, which was newly emerging, was the telegraph. And this was one of the levers that Lincoln used beautifully to communicate with his commanders out in the field. Now, there were some commanders, George McClellan among them, who weren't attuned to the use of technology, but Ulysses Grant and Abraham Lincoln, they had a strong connection even before they knew one another. And the use of the telegraph was one way of developing that relationship. Now, personally, my first experience with leading virtually goes back 31 years. We had a new video conference room in our organization. We could sign up to use it. And in 1989, I took the initiative to organize a video conference, 18 sites, 70 people. I learned a lot, let's put it that way. The technology was cutting edge, believe it. We were motivated to use it, but one thing I found out right away, it's a very cold medium. And back then I was very systematic, very proper, formal, and unemotional. And I realized, this is not working. If you want to lead people, you've got to make a connection emotionally. Well, we did another one not too long after that. And one of the big changes was I made it very interactive. Unlike this webinar where it's me talking and you may be chatting, doing a poll, I made sure there were a lot of interactive components. I asked them to take the floor for 5 or 10 minutes. I gave them assignments ahead of time. So it wasn't my show, it wasn't my team, it was very interactive. And that's one thing I aspire to do in the training that I conduct and the leadership that I perform. Now, my most recent experience virtually leading is the Leadership Institute. We just finished up last week. 3 months long. We use Zoom Pro. Technology worked great. 13 weeks, 3-hour meetings, 10 engineers across the state. Great people. You probably know some of these folks. So we had these meetings. Also, we had a lot of email back and forth and also phone calls. Now, one thing I did was every week allow them to meet with me 15 to 30 minutes one-on-one, and we had a number of those as well. So what has changed? Technology, of course. More platforms and apps, more features, wider applicability, faster, easier to use. What has not changed? People, people, people. Human nature has not changed. Personality types, people's emotional needs, If you read about people back 3,000 years ago, sounds like people today. Also, the essence of leadership has not changed. The way we practice it, the communication means that we use, that's changed, but we still have to see things. We still have to influence people. We still have to inspire them. And I will say it's probably 3 times tougher because of the technology and having to do it remotely. Now, what are the special challenges and best practices that we can use? Well, the first and foremost is people are isolated. Some of us, hey, no problem. If we are introverts, we don't mind being by ourselves. We're energized by ideas. One of my grandsons is a world-class introvert, and he told me, Grandpa, this shutdown, the pandemic, is creating the Olympic Games for introverts. It's a real challenge to spark group spontaneity, energy. Brainstorming can be very challenging. And here's the thing that troubles me the most. The interpersonal communication, I think, is significantly diminished. Number one, we can't see each other as well. You're just seeing me from the shoulders up, basically, and I'm trying to use some gestures, but it's not quite the same. And I can't see you at all in this case. And when I do see you, I only see part of you. But also, I only see you for a limited amount of time if we are on a team. Out of those 3 months with those 10 engineers in the Leadership Institute, we had 39 hours together out of 3 months. 39 hours face to face. Here's a big challenge: attention span, particularly when you're bombarded with so much information, so many things going on. How do you hold people's attention? That's something we have to really work on. My solution, unlike this webinar, is to make it very interactive. With the Leadership Institute, we broke into groups of 3 or 4 people, and I had them interacting much more than in any Leadership Institute I've conducted before. And to do so, I had to give them very clear ideas of what they were going to do, a very clear direction, but also I had to get out of the way and let them operate on their own. That requires a lot of trust. I'm happy to say they came through with flying colors. And then how many of you have to deal with people who they don't want to be on video, they don't want to speak up, they don't want to be on television per se? And here's something that troubles me. How do we ever know what kind of impact we're having? By me not being able to see you, I can't make any in-course adjustments, in-flight corrections. I have to imagine how you're experiencing this and maybe get feedback from time to time. Before we go any further, Katie, have we had any questions that people would like to ask on anything that we've covered or anything we're still going to cover?
There is nothing in the questions box right now. If you have a question, go ahead and type it in.
And whenever you get any questions, Katie, please feel free to interrupt me and pose the question. Happy to hear them.
Will do.
Now, to my way of thinking, there are 7 skills associated with leading well, be it traditionally or remotely. As I mentioned before, creating, developing, sustaining, deepening, nurturing, trust. Make sure people know exactly what we're trying to accomplish. They have to be able to see and feel the end result that we want to achieve. If they're able to see and feel what we're wanting to achieve, we're taking a big step towards influencing them. But there are a bunch more things we have to do to influence. I'll give you some tips and best practices for all of these. Of course, inspiring people, engaging them. And here's one thing I know for sure. To inspire people, you have to look inspired. You have to look engaged. You have to look motivated yourself. Because what you're doing then is you are infecting them with your enthusiasm. That's called emotional contagion. Of course, nothing's perfect. Mistakes will be made. We use people's experiences, good, bad, or in between, as coaching opportunities to teach them, to facilitate their improvement, but ultimately to empower them to be able to do things on their own, self-sufficiently. And then, of course, getting people to feel connected to one another, not just motivated, but motivated to be working with other people. And of course, that's so challenging in a virtual setting.
Rich, we have a question.
Fire away, Kate.
Okay, what differences would you expect to see in leading newly formed teams versus long-standing ones in the current environment?
Oh, absolutely. Whenever you have new people, that's the forming stage. They are entering. So there's a lot of caution. There's a lot of hesitation. There's a lot of wait and see. So at this point, the leader has to really work hard to what? Bind the group together to get that person on board. When teams are already formed, they're intact teams, you have a history with people. And Katie, would you publish the next poll, please?
Sure thing. And the question is, which one leadership skill do you most want to build?
And then we'll ask you another poll on what's your second most important skill to build.
Okay, about 10 more seconds to get your responses in.
What's number
Okay,
one,
and
Katie?
the results. Number one is inspiring best efforts. Then we have influencing buy-in and nurturing relationships, coaching and unifying, those are tied. And lastly, setting direction.
That pretty much tracks with what my experience has been with other groups. Getting people fired up, particularly when you're having to do with technology. Would you publish the second poll? What's your second most important leadership skill to build? Let's see if this changes at all.
Okay, take about 10 more seconds to get your responses in. Okay, Rich, the results. The number one thing is influencing buy-in. Then we have inspiring best efforts. Then coaching and unifying, followed by nurturing relationships. And lastly, setting direction.
Okay, very good. Now, this is a good thing about the technology. We're able to do polls pretty quickly to get people's point of view on things. So I would encourage you to do a lot of polling in order to get people's input, but also to give you a sense of where the group's thinking is. Now we're going to study each one of those six skills rather, but let's do it a little bit differently. Let's do it using a case study. Imagine this situation. Just now you were asked to lead a complex 8-month-long project. You're told it's 1 month along and struggling. And the person in charge before is gone. They've left the organization. You don't know why. It's not been disclosed. You also hear that the project team is meeting in 5 minutes and they're expecting the former PM and they don't know you. How's that for a challenge? In 5 minutes, you have to meet with these folks. What are you going to say? What are you going to do? What's your game plan? Well, you do have 5 minutes. Well, maybe 4 minutes because you got to take at least a minute to get online. So you only have a short bit of time. This is when leadership matters the most, when it's unexpected, when things are tough. Here's where your leadership ability really comes through. And this is a place and time where you can earn trust and begin the process of influencing. So one thing we encourage you to do is to anticipate when you're leading online, particularly, what's the worst thing that could happen? And then plan for it. Anticipate, plan, set into place some workarounds. Now, if you ask me, I always revert to that leadership process. It all starts with relationships. That's job one, particularly when you're taking charge. You may want to set direction. You might get things going. My life lesson is take the time to build relationships. That's quite a proclamation for a avowed introvert. I'm in recovery. So how do you shake hands with people virtually? Well, assess their emotional state and their level of trust with you, and then do things to show the character, the competence, and the caring, and do it consistently. That are the C's that earn people's trust. Now, how much do people trust you? Another way of putting this is how close do they feel to you? So there you are, and around you are all these people in your life, in your work life. How close do they feel to you? The ones who feel close to you have high trust. The ones who feel distant, that's low trust. Those are the ones that we need to pull into our inner circle of high trust. Now, how do you do this virtually? How do you develop that feeling of closeness, a feeling of safety and belief? There's the trust formula. Whenever you have a difficult message to communicate, show caring first. Start with the heart, then talk to the head, and then always finish up with the heart. Integrity, show character. Doing the harder right rather than the easier wrong. And taking on this assignment to lead this group of people that's struggling. That's a tough road to hoe. And then while communicating, don't just be confident, but look competent. Look like you know what you're doing, which takes a lot of pretending sometimes. Sometimes you have to fake it until you make it. Act like a leader before you feel like you're a leader, and do this consistently.
Rich, we have
Now,
a question kind of along those lines.
please.
What are things to think about when you have to give criticism?
Oh, yes. Be kind. Talk about the good things the person has done, no matter how wretched that person may appear to you, how difficult they may be towards you. That's a human being, somebody's child. Find the good things, start off with that, and then ask them questions. Sometimes they know what's wrong, what needs to be fixed. We'll talk about coaching in a few minutes. So acknowledge the shock that they must be experiencing. Show your empathy and caring. Lead with the heart. And also keep this first meeting very brief and state only the facts, and then arrange to meet with them by a phone call or a online call one-on-one in private. I would not try to accomplish much with this group all at once, all together. And in the one-on-one calls, here's where you can start establishing individual relationships. And one way is to listen more than you talk, be more interested in them than trying to be interesting. Search for things in common. Gradually introduce yourself and do it humbly. Now, I would say have at least 2 phone calls with these people, and then when you meet all together, thank them. Thank them for the information they've provided and the work that they've done. Start with the heart, appreciation. That'll get you a long way. Also, express your deep commitment to them, to the project, and to the client. Talk about your hopes for the team, even if it's struggling. Talk about how things are going to be just fine. We're going to get through this if we do it together. Also, talk about the core values that you live by and want them to live by. Restate your need for support, and then make sure they know the next steps. And the next steps are going to be starting to tackle this issue of the project and getting things done and working together. The bottom line, connect. Look like you know what you're doing. Show your integrity, but probably most importantly, show you care about them. Now, clear direction is all about assessing things. Where are things right now? Where could things be? Many of you are probably familiar with the SWOT analysis. And when you do the SWOT, here's where you might identify possible changes needed, but I wouldn't go making radical changes right away. Consider your options, see where the team is coming from. They've got more experience than you do at this point with this project. Imagine the current, or assess the current reality, but imagine what is the end state that we want to get to. Here's the way things are right now. Here's how I envision things becoming. And here's what I foresee happening. Now you have to set goals. And the idea is to make them SMART. You've probably heard of this acronym. This is a real good one to study, because when goals are SMART, they're going to be something that people can see and feel. The target, the destination has to be visible to them, and hopefully emotionally compelling as well. Now, you've called people, you've introduced yourself to the client, you've met with the entire group, things are worse than expected. How are you going to influence people to make a change? Well, first of all, assess their likely reaction and behavior towards you, and then use influence strategies that are unique to that individual person, because each person is going to react differently. Here's where your emotional intelligence really cranks in. Now, here are the three major factors why people will accept your ideas. They'll accept your leadership. First of all, because they trust you. That's an ongoing task. Earn trust by nurturing those relationships. Also, lay out the logic. But it's not just about logic and trust. It's also finding the emotions that will compel them to want to pursue this because it feels important and urgent. Also, the feeling that you are a reliable, credible person and setting the example. Trust is an emotion. Also, logic will get them to feel calmer, more certain about what's expected. So make sure the benefits are clear. And if there are obstacles, talk about how they can be overcome. Your request must be important and urgent, feel doable, feel safe because maybe other people are doing it. We've already tried this. And it's necessary because bad things could happen if we don't make this happen. Now, each person is going to be motivated differently to get on board. And here's where you have to assess their skill for getting the job done, but also their motivation. We could take 3 hours talking just about this chart. But the key point is, one size does not fit all. You have to adapt to that person's attitude towards you and their skill towards getting the job done. Here's a memory aid for setting expectations. I'd be happy to send copies of this presentation to you if you send me an email, and you'll get my email address at the end of the course. We have to make sure they understand, they're on board, and they feel some accountability. Here's some of the things that we can do. Now, to continue the case study, some people are feeling defensive or demoralized. Maybe they're blaming management or a particular team member for allowing the predicament to develop. So how are we going to inspire, coach, and unite them? What's your game plan? To inspire people to do their best, you have to, again, look at each individual person. What's their motivation level, low, medium, or high? And then orchestrate the unique factors that drive that person's best efforts. So are they actively engaged, all in? Are they just there to do 8 hours work for 8 hours pay, passively engaged? Or are they swimming against the tide, actively disengaged? Well, you have to expect in the average organization, and these are the figures most recently compiled by the Gallup organization, you're going to have people in each of the categories, unless you're blessed to have a unbelievable team. So assess where people are and then take steps accordingly. There are lots of things you can do to inspire people. Carrots and sticks, they aren't on the list. Be friendly towards people. Show appreciation. Tell them how important their work is. Listen to them. Give them some freedom on how to try things. Start off with things that are easy and then make them increasingly challenging. With each one of these steps, you're going to arouse a different emotion. Now, coaching people is about assessing them and then providing them the feedback and help that each person needs. Here's my favorite tool for assessing performance. What went well? what didn't go well, and then what kind of change do we make to make things better? So as I mentioned before in that question earlier, offer reinforcing feedback. Ask questions about what didn't go well. Ask questions about what they did do well. And then offer constructive feedback as needed. Now, reinforcing feedback, words of praise, the story about what they did well, and then the positive impact. And then go with a bunch of questions. How do you think you did? If they talk about something that was a problem, what happened with that? If they don't bring it up, you could ask the question, what happened with the deadline? What happened with this data? What caused that? Be more curious than irritated. And then ask them, okay, so what's your plan going forward? The way to hold people accountable is to ask questions, to get them to account for what went well, what didn't go well, and to account for what they would do differently going forward. And then if you need to give constructive feedback, you might pose it as a question. Have you considered this? Or you could be more assertive. Here's what I recommend. Here's what I'd like to see. Now, final order business, unifying them. Well, to create a unified collaborative team, you have to talk up teamwork. And I like to talk up the term selfless teamwork. And then when you see it, reinforce it, particularly online. Keep an eye out for people who go above and beyond the call of duty to help other team members, and then recognize it when you see it. When you see it, say it to them. Set it as an expectation. And then think, what are the factors that promote unity? Well, they're feelings. So you want to promote feelings of achievement, pride, belonging, inclusion, and then feelings of importance by giving them a voice and letting them contribute. Achievement, challenging goals, belonging, rituals, symbols of identity, contribution, give them a role to perform, ask for their input. Bottom line, leadership is leadership, traditionally, virtually, but the challenge virtually is making that human connection and also making the desired results crystal clear where they can see it and they can feel it. Here's the game plan. I'm not saying it's easy. Leadership is 6 times harder than it looks. And then when you make it virtually, it's 3 times harder than that. But with experience, all this stuff will feel more comfortable, never perfectly comfortable, more natural as people become acclimated to it. We've got a few minutes remaining. Questions? Katie, have we had any questions?
I don't see any in the box currently. We'll give everyone a few minutes to type those in.
One question I'm often asked is, what are some things you can do to build that spirit? And with the Leadership Institute, every one of the 13 meetings, we would start off with at least a 15-minute fun icebreaker. The trick was to make it fun, but also connected to the lessons. Well, one of the lessons of leadership is nurturing relationships. So some of the icebreakers were all about getting to know people in a fun or interesting way. What's something about you that people would be surprised to learn? We played a game called Secrets. We had breakout sessions where they took 10 minutes to find things in common with one another, personally or professionally. I gave them some exercises where they had to play a game together in competition with another team. Some of you who graduated from the Leadership Institute might remember the card sort exercise. Using playing cards, we did an exercise that illustrated the importance of goal setting, delegation, and collaboration.
We have a couple of questions that have come through. For
Please.
teams, for teams to be successful in the virtual setting, do you think there is a need for more one-on-one interaction now with the team leader and members in addition to all the team meetings? How do you find the balance? Is it weekly one-on-ones or monthly or quarterly?
Yeah, good point. There's an old saying, absence makes the heart go wander. Out of sight, out of mind. I would not go more than a week without some kind of touch with each member of the team, be it a 15-minute phone call, a chat, a happy hour libation conversation. The idea is to develop experiences that are fun and engaging where they want to participate.
How can you lead your manager?
Once again for me, Katie.
How can you lead your manager?
Lead your manager. If you can lead your manager, game over. Now, leadership is always about getting people to willingly do things. And of course, your manager upward is not obligated to follow your lead. So here's where you have to earn that trust. Number one, you have to be totally trustworthy. That will get you far. That will get you your manager's ear. And then number two, you have to have a solid, logical case, business case for what you propose your leader to do. But third, this is a human being. You're going to have to connect with them emotionally, stir up some desire, or maybe a little bit of fear that if we don't do this, bad things could happen. That's the real test of leadership, leading people over whom you have absolutely no authority. It can be done. Trust, a strong logical case, that'll get you far, but also tap into that person's emotions. It doesn't hurt to show your boss how much you appreciate them, how much you value them, how much you've learned from them. And of course, you want to be totally sincere in doing this. Other questions?
Yes. How can you recharge yourself if your leadership motivation wanes?
That is an unbelievable question, because before you can lead other people, you have to lead yourself. And some days you're going to be down. Here's where your emotional intelligence becomes so important. See what's happening to you. See the negative emotions that are creeping in there. And then remind yourself of what you're trying to accomplish here. And also motivate yourself. One way is to remember how good you are. Lift up your eyebrows, smile, and say, I can do this. I will do this. I must do this. And I'm going to do this well. A lot of it is how you talk to yourself. One more question. We've got 1 minute.
All right, last question. In today's world, what is usually expected is more, often unrealistically so. How do you balance honesty with the team over the challenges while building enthusiasm for these challenges?
Ask the question one more time.
Okay. In today's world, what is usually expected is more, often unrealistically so. How do you balance honesty with the team over the challenges while building enthusiasm for these challenges?
You have to earn trust, but also say people the words of Michelangelo, the great Renaissance artist. The danger is not in setting goals that are too high and not achieving them. The danger is setting your goals too low and achieving them. So leaders are people who inspire us to go above and beyond the call of duty. Not that we're going to get all the way up there, but to do our best. My final thought: what's the future of virtual leadership? It's going to look something like this, where we're going to be virtual ourselves. We will be in a holodeck where we will all appear to be interacting with one another when actually it's going to be our avatar, and our physical body will be at our home. But our avatar will be out there interacting with people, and someday it's going to feel totally real. Thanks everybody for attending. Here's my email address. Contact me with your questions. If there are any questions that weren't answered, I'll reach out for you. And you're welcome to email me, and I will send you a copy of these slides if you want.
All right.
Thanks
Thank
for
you so much, Rich. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. Everyone, grab your favorite libation and head on over to the libation conversation. Your PDH form will be emailed to you shortly. All right, have a good evening, everyone. Thank you, Rich.
Katie, thank you for all your help. I appreciate it.